Good afternoon. My name is John Foster. I'm with the US EPA's Office of Community Revitalization, and I'm going to just show myself for a second so folks can see who they're talking with. And I am going to do a presentation today on the Local Foods, Local Places program, the application process for the Local Foods, Local Places application period for 2021. The application window is open right now through October 30th, and we'll be talking about a little bit about the program, also the criteria for selection, and a little bit about the application process. So I look forward to sharing with you some information about it. A couple of little housekeeping issues. This is a MS Team Live event that we're doing, so there is a chat feature available in which you can submit questions. I have a co-presenter who will be kind of working in the background, Chip Gherkin. Chip, if you're on, maybe present yourself so they know your voice.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
Thanks. And so because there's quite a few people who are participating in this today, we will try to answer kind of a spot selection of questions, and Chip will raise those. We may not be able to get to every question during the presentation, and that's fine because we will try to document and capture all the questions in the chat feature if you have a question, and we will distribute answers to those questions after the webinar is over. So there'll be an additional opportunity to try to work with you in terms of answering any questions you have about the process. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, if you'll bear with me for 1 second. And Chip, you'll be my guide. You let me know if you see the screen or not.
Yep, got it, John.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to, as I mentioned, the Local Foods, Local Places program is having the application period for 2021. It's the 7th round of the program. And the program's purpose has pretty much remained the same over the course of several years. The desired outcomes of this program are kind of a 3-pillar description that we use frequently to talk about it. The first being economic opportunity, focusing on creating economic opportunity for local farmers and businesses. And that could be food entrepreneurs as well. It could be value-added food processors, and anybody basically who might find a business opportunity associated with the local food market. The other pillar, kind of coupled with this, is increasing access to healthy local foods. So in addition to kind of trying to support the local food market on the business side, is actually ensuring that those local food activities are benefiting community members, people in the community seeking to access healthy foods, especially amongst disadvantaged groups, which could be people who live in an area that's a food desert, or they have limited access, or they have difficulty in finding transit options to get to where there is food available, healthy foods. So we look at that as an important pillar and component to the program. The third pillar is about revitalizing downtowns and main streets. It's really the local places portion of what is Local Foods, Local Places. And really what we're looking for is the intersection of those two efforts. One being that the local food system development can benefit revitalization of a downtown area or a neighborhood that is in need for local food access. I will also add that there's 2 principles that we tend to work off of within the program, and those the 2 principles are that this is a community-driven program. We don't come in with answers to your questions as much as we facilitate your exploration of finding goals and solutions within the community. We may ask probing questions to try to facilitate that discussion, and we do have facilitation expertise that would help guide the questioning towards exploring some element of the food system so that it's a beneficial discussion to you. The other is that we really focus on community engagement. It's not enough to just have a community that has a small group of people within the food system who are trying to kind of push out their ideas of what works, even though it may be beneficial to the community. We really want to see engagement, especially down to the neighborhood level, to people in need who would benefit from what it is that's being done within the local food system. What you receive as a community from the technical assistance is a team of federal staff or contractors with expertise, both in terms of community development, revitalization, as well as on the local food system side. You also would receive a workshop. Typically in the past, that's been an in-person workshop on site with the community, where we bring together stakeholders in the community to help cobble together a community action plan. This year, we've actually pivoted towards virtual workshops. Next year will be based on the data about the pandemic and where we go with that, but that decision hasn't been made for next year. We would like to have in-person workshops whenever we can, so we're planning as if that's where we would go next year until we otherwise would decide to pivot away from that. But the workshop is really the highlight of the focal point of the technical assistance to bring people in the community together. And then the other thing that you receive is we will help put together, working with the steering committee locally, put together a detailed action plan on what needs to be done to reach community goals that the community has selected, and really hash out the details of that action plan. This and the deliverable we'll produce is actually a report. This is an example from Charlottesville, Virginia, but that report will be delivered to the steering committee for use as, hopefully, as a living document. That's something that the community will use to move forward in trying to achieve its goals. And it also documents the workshop and a lot of the comments, the action brainstorming that takes place during the workshop, all the elements that go into it and people's input are all memorialized into the document. One other thing that the document includes is an appendices of resources and a bibliography that will both offer technical resources in terms of a particular topic area. So if there's a focus in one of the goals, say on walkability, it lists resources related to walkability. There's resources related to food systems, food hubs, co-packing facilities, all the different elements of the food system locally. That is also something that's in the appendices. We also have within it community data profile, just some economic and other information related specifically to the community. We tend to have a photo album if there's an in-person workshop showing some of the community elements, the workshop participants. The cover of this report actually shows the workshop participants, some of the workshop participants from Charlottesville. So this will be the document that's delivered at the end of the process. The process involves kind of three main phases. The first is a planning phase, where if as a selected community, the point of contact listed on the application would form a steering committee, and we're really looking for strong, healthy partnerships across the community and with stakeholders who would benefit from what it is that you're trying to do with a particular project or group of projects. And that steering committee would meet for 3 planning calls ahead of the workshop, and they basically would help to plan the logistics of a workshop, as well as kind of formulate the community goals that would be used as the kind of the basis of discussions in the workshop. And then the second phase is to actually convene. This is the workshop. Typically, the workshop is done over 2 days. In the virtual world, we've experimented with 2 to 3 days. And having different sessions, so we break it up a little bit more. But let's say in-person workshops, you would typically see a tour of the community, which is designed to highlight key assets within the community related to food systems or placemaking or distressed neighborhoods, or if the entire community's in a distressed area, highlighting the things that are of concern to people in the community. And then that tour also helps, if federal partners are present or state partners, give them a sense on the ground of what is happening in the community. And then there's kind of a broad initial discussion about community values, visions, and goals within the community. Those are really high-level discussions and aspirations of where people would like to see their community go and what they would like to see it look down the road 5-10 years from now, and further. And so taking all that, then making sure that the goals that are listed are aligned with that, and there's an opportunity within these workshops to work on the goals, redefine them, reword them if necessary, and then get to where on day 2 of the workshop, you actually start to brainstorm specific actions. And we have a whole matrix designed to facilitate that discussion and get into really nitty-gritty details about action planning. And then prioritizing the actions that you want to focus on first. And then after the workshop's completed, which usually offers a boost of momentum locally, we try to sustain that momentum with 3 planning calls, or excuse me, 3 calls after the workshop, where the steering committee helps and works with the facilitation team to draft the action plan and to revise it and continue to work on refining the actions, especially some of the details that sometimes get lost in the workshop conversation. And then that action plan is often used to propel additional activities within the community after the 3rd call.
Hey, John.
In 2019, yes.
Sorry to interrupt, John. Really quickly, we've got several questions about whether or not this presentation will be available later as a recording. I was trying to see if you want to address that for the whole group here.
Oh, thanks, Chip. Yes, this is being recorded, so we hope to make that available to folks. And also, if you have questions when you're working on the application, if you're planning to submit an application, the email address that's listed on the website on where to submit your application is also a place you can go and ask a question. Just email a question and we will try to answer that way as well. So there's 2 ways to kind of make sure that you're understanding the process and what needs to be in the application. But this should be recorded. Thanks, Chip. In 2019, the co-sponsors of this program was the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the office I'm in, which is the Office of Community Revitalization, and USDA, or U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Marketing Service office. Having said that, we work closely with a lot of other federal partners who have actively participated in the workshops, including other parts of USDA, the Rural Development Office, the Food and Nutrition Service, and also with other federal agencies, including HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, the Small Business Administration, Economic Development Administration, and other agencies have participated on a smaller scale in some regions, including like Federal Reserve Bank and the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the cases where we've worked with tribal communities as well. So in addition to the federal partners, there also are many state agencies, environmental agencies, health and human service agencies, food and nutrition agencies, departments of education who have participated actively. And we, as the federal team and the facilitation team, try to reach out to prospective partners ahead of the workshop to encourage their participation, though we can't guarantee it, and sometimes that's contingent on their travel. This is a quick map of all the LFLP communities. The yellow ones are this year's recipients of technical assistance. Combined with the prior ones, we've now served over 124 communities, and we like to say that this is also part of a community of practice where we utilize their expertise and their experience with the next round of communities that are receiving technical assistance, and encourage them to share information with each other and ask questions of each other. And And often they share that information with communities that are not LFLP communities. So there's also opportunity to go to their website. The USDA website is where we house all the final community action plans, a copy of those, and you can reach that through the LFLP website on the EPA site as well. But you can look within any of the communities that are listed and find their action plan, and the point of contact from that community is also listed, and you can always reach out to them, and they're aware that that's a possibility. So,
hey, John.
Yes.
Just really quick, we're getting several questions about basically funding. Can you go a little bit more in detail as far as the difference between this technical assistance and a grant?
Great question. And probably we should put a slide in there to talk about that. So Local Foods, Local Places is not providing a grant. There's no financial transaction where we're actually delivering any sort of funding directly to the community. It is in-kind support. It is facilitation that we provide, and we try to bring to the table the federal partners, but it is technical assistance being provided through the facilitation of the workshop and this whole planning process. So there is no money exchanged in this to communities receiving the technical assistance. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility, and then after this I will kind of move towards talking about some of the criteria that may be of interest to a lot of people who are listening in. Primarily the applicants for this program tend to be organizations that are working within a small community or are working on behalf of a neighborhood when it's in a larger urban area. In the case of smaller communities, it's often a city government. It could be sometimes we see economic development corporations or others that may be working closely with the city apply for the program. And all of those would be fine. What we don't tend to see are private entities necessarily, a business, for-profit business applying to the program, and that's not what we would seek to be a point of contact. Local colleges and universities, generally speaking, don't apply. Rather, they would have or encourage a community stakeholder group that they are working with to apply, and we would probably encourage that in terms of application. So that just gives you a sense of who can apply. The other entities that can apply are tribal governments, and we also encourage that. Eligible communities can come from any state in the United States, but also U.S. territories or on tribal land. And as I mentioned before, small communities and large communities have both applied to the program. Just would mention two things about that. One, with small communities, we're not looking for, we've had some very small communities apply, I think as few as 500 people in the community, but we're looking for something more than maybe a crossroads with a gas station. So there's a little bit of a cutoff there that works against the community if it's not really looking like it's a community. And then large communities should really focus on a particular neighborhood or a downtown district or some subset of the large urban area.
Hey, John?
Yes, go ahead, Chip.
Yeah, an interesting question here along those lines as far as large versus small communities. Let me read it for you. We are interested in applying for 2 neighborhoods in an urban city that are food deserts due to the closure of grocery stores in the last few years. These neighborhoods are very economically disadvantaged and lack transportation. Because our locality is urban, there are not local farmers in our city, but rural cities in our region do have local farmers and agricultural presence. We're working to bring grocery stores to these neighborhoods and are facing challenges. Thus, we're open to any ideas to increase access to food for these residents, but don't yet know how we would incorporate local foods. Would it still be reasonable for us to apply?
I would say yes, if you focus on a specific neighborhood, or it could be more than one neighborhood. Ideally, they would be geographically close to each other so that that component of the placemaking side, as I mentioned, the intersection of food system development and placemaking is ideal. And if you start to add too many neighborhoods together, that could be an issue. We have seen communities take one neighborhood at a time approach to applying and say, we're going to work with this one particular neighborhood. And then that in turn, they apply the techniques used in the workshop to other neighborhoods. We have seen a couple of cases where a single neighborhood applied from a large urban area and unexpectedly found that in an abutting neighborhood that maybe they hadn't interacted a lot in the past became very interested in it and actually enhanced the outcomes of their workshop by kind of engaging that second neighborhood as part of their overall process. What we're less inclined, when I say we, the review team, which I'll talk about that as well in a little bit, it's an interagency review team in the scoring process. They're not necessarily looking for a citywide plan or generic plan, but more of a place-focused plan, and whether it's that specific neighborhood, and looking for place elements related to that. And there's a lot of discussion and information available on the EPA's Office of Community Revitalization about placemaking and place-related type of issues to give you a better sense of that. It could be, like you see here, an example, the Silver City, New Mexico Food Co-op as a kind of a focal point or place-based focal point of the nexus of their downtown revitalization efforts and building their local food system. Talking about criteria now, there's basically 6 criteria for the application review team to consider. The first of these is needs. So what scores high is when we see that the application is representing a community that really faces significant issues in disinvestment in a downtown, or there's particular economic distress or disinvestment in long-established neighborhoods. And the project should typically benefit a traditionally underserved or high poverty community within, it could be the overall community, it could be within the urban context, a particular neighborhood that it focuses on. So need is the first criteria. The second is capacity. And really what we're looking for here is that the organization has enough capacity and resources to actually do something with the implementation plan that comes out of the workshop. So there needs to be enough capacity to see that. On the other hand, we sometimes refer to kind of a sweet spot in terms of capacity. If the capacity is really high and the community has all the assets, and sometimes you'll see this maybe more in a large urban area where they have planning offices available who they can draw on, and they've done a lot of the work on local food development already, then they really want to make the case for where they're going with the next additional step, because what we provide is often bring together partners in a community where maybe partners haven't come together before, or they really haven't thought through local food system development, or are new to it and don't quite understand it all, or they just are struggling to bring together all the partners and understand who would be the partners needed when you look at a food system in kind of a holistic perspective. The lead organization in terms of capacity should be able to benefit from the workshop and convene stakeholders, and that can be that, again, maybe they don't have quite the means to reach out on their own that they would like, and they're looking for some assistance in trying to figure out how to best reach out and who to convene. And that they should be able to demonstrate, if they've received some assistance in the past, how they have kind of benefited from that assistance, and also how they would build on that past assistance. The other selection criteria, the third one, is focused on goals, and these are the goals that would be listed in a community action plan, and really trying to understand what are your overall goals, and you want to state these in the application. But looking for support of development of local food system in a way that really encourages downtown revitalization. Again, you could put a food hub anywhere in the city and try to make that work. But if you're thinking of it through the lens of placemaking, then you may want to think about, a particular location where it can benefit other efforts within the city to improve quality of life, to promote economic development, promote job development, and access to healthy foods as well. We also like to see where the problem is addressing or attempting to address environmental issues, both within the built environment as well as from the EPA perspective, environmental quality. So there could be benefits to placing a, if you're going to have a food co-op developed, for example, or you're thinking about that, is there a brownfield site downtown that's kind of serving as an economic drag because it hasn't been cleaned up? And is there opportunity to do brownfields assessment to understand the nature of potential contamination at that site or that vacant building or vacant lot if you're interested in community gardens, but utilizing something that can offer an environmental benefit in addition to food system development and economic revitalization. And then other aspects of it are really focused on health and livability. So talking about like walkability, which can also have environmental benefits, but also health benefits, and seeing that these assets in the community are encouraging more active lifestyle and increasing food access in a way that offers health benefits and considers other social determinants of health as well. The fit of the program is maybe a little bit more vague, but the idea is that the goals listed in the application and what the applicant is trying to do fit well with what it is that we offer to maximize the benefit. And that's really to be able to convene stakeholders to develop an action plan during a workshop. So in some cases, the fit may not be a good fit because of the nature of what you're trying to achieve. As an example, if you're just simply trying to bring in a grocery store from outside and looking to develop a marketing plan to lure those grocery stores into a neighborhood, this is different than that because that may or may not be part of local food system development that is encouraging neighborhood residents to get active in the local food system. And there's other elements of placemaking and food system development that may not be considered a good fit with the scope of what it is that we offer. Another important criteria that is scored in the application review process is partnerships. We have found many times that in communities where there's a food system working, or people within the food system who are working kind of in their own stovepipe or within their own element, and they're not reaching across to think about placemaking, who would be involved there. It might be city people, planning offices, departments of transportation, it might be the local school district. What we really like to see are strong partnerships reaching out across the community to explore where what you're doing in one stovepipe can have a positive or negative impact on other stovepipes, and really understanding and exploring the interaction of those different efforts and seeing how jointly they can work together to come up with a more enhanced outcome for each of the individual elements. We like to see some history that you've worked with partners, that you're not doing this on your own, and that or that you're trying to push forward a project that hasn't considered the input of other partners. So this is a really important one for the success, both in terms of the workshop and having all the people who need to be involved in that discussion present at the workshop, but also in terms of outcomes later on.
John?
Yes, go ahead, Chip.
Can I pop in really quick with a specific question regarding sort of fit for applicants here?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Could you speak more to project-based initiatives such as a public seed library and tool library to support food production in the city, both serving the local agricultural community and in providing resources like tools and seeds that reinforce economic development and food production, especially within COVID? Multiple neighborhoods would benefit in our city, which has a high poverty rate, and there are many stakeholders that would shape these resources, but we need TA and a build out of a community design process to make this happen. Is this possible within this opportunity?
Yes, it's possible, and I would probably encourage you to think about, we've had a lot of communities working within the food system side and community gardens. When you're talking about seed library, they do that, but they also talk about how they would connect that with other efforts, placemaking efforts, for example, how and where you would distribute seeds, and where the seed library would be located, and then coupling that maybe with other placemaking efforts that may be indirectly related to that. If the community garden is tapping into that, and the school district is also using that maybe in terms of developing curriculum related to indigenous plant species, or just agricultural awareness, thinking about how it feeds into both the food system side and the placemaking side. I would encourage you to try to explore that further. That would strengthen the application, generally speaking. I hope that answers. If not, feel free to add follow-up questions to your chat, and if we don't get to it in here, we'll make sure to try to include that in the overall questions that are sent out later. I did want to mention really fast, opportunity zones, if you're not aware of them, are designated zones for economic development and encouraging and providing benefits basically to those who would invest within those zones to encourage economic development and revitalization within communities or distressed areas. And we last year and this year again will encourage and give extra, I don't want to say extra points, but higher priority to opportunity zones. So if you're in one, make sure to note that. And if you're not in one, you may want to look and see where there are some opportunity zones within your community and reaching out to them as part of maybe your overall work or effort. And this is a link to opportunity zones, but if you Google that, you would probably be able to find them. But just look for a map that shows where they are, and if you have trouble finding that, we can also assist you with that. I did want to just highlight two examples, quick examples, because I know time runs short on these webinars, but the first was St. Paul, Minnesota, as an example. And they set up goals basically to form in a stretch along University Avenue in St. Paul, a corridor that has a large immigrant population, has had a lot of distressed neighborhoods over time. Some of that caused by a highway running through, was carved through the middle of the neighborhood and kind of cut two neighborhoods apart. Over the years, saw a lot of disinvestment, and but also saw a large influx of immigrants, including in the case of the applicant, it was representing the Hmong population from, I think it's the Asian Economic Development Group within St. Paul that first applied, but also working with neighboring neighborhoods to really try to bring together a permanent marketplace, a year-round food marketplace within the corridor, and also to generate more opportunity for Hmong growers, many of whom live in the urban core but go out into the surrounding region to farm on land that they rent. So trying to look for opportunities for them, both in terms of increasing their own land ownership, so it may be more economically viable for them to continue to grow, but also to provide opportunities for them to sell locally within the local market that they maybe don't have such an opportunity right now. And then to try to increase the vibrancy of a stretch of the corridor in the community that had a lot of blight, and they've done a lot of work already, and really exciting. This is just a picture of a park that they created in the middle of the corridor. It's actually kind of wedged between two parking lots, but they used it to enhance outdoor market area where they used the parking lot for the market, but created a nice feature within that area. The parking lot's kind of behind the picture here. The strengths were that they really, when they applied, there was a very strong neighborhood placemaking component in the urban context, coupled with this desire to really improve the food economic entrepreneurship opportunities for members of the Hmong community. And it had an ideal mix of placemaking, food access, and small business development and education as well, even in the urban context here. And then they had strong partnerships that with the other neighborhoods, surrounding neighborhoods, because sometimes in this case, the University Avenue actually divides the two neighborhoods, and they maybe traditionally hadn't worked together, and this group was kind of working to help amplify those partnerships across neighborhoods. Another example is Aliquippa. This one was in a state distressed, or state designated distressed community. They had capacity right kind of where we like to see it, where they had established some partnerships and done some precursor work to the workshop that would make the workshop probably leapfrog more to where they wanted to get with the goals. And they were able to bring together a large group of people who really represented the demographic profile of the community, something else we like to see, and focused on making it a more livable community, increasing the fresh food access for a community that's struggled economically. So it's really a nice holistic approach that they took to making sure that all these different efforts were working together to amplify the outcomes.
Hey, John, really quickly, while you're on case studies, we had a question about maybe giving an example of a project in a tribal community. I know you've done a number of those.
Yeah, we've had a number of tribal communities. We did a project in Lapwai, Idaho, with the Nez Perce tribe, and their focus was on their placemaking component was actually repurposing an old abandoned U.S. cavalry fort on tribal lands, and a lot of issues for them in terms of how to go forward with that, given some of the history associated with that site. And also developing food system that would encourage from kind of what they would call culturally appropriate foods. We also did a work in Mission, South Dakota with the Lakota Sioux, the Rosebud Reservation, where they were interested in food sovereignty, again, kind of focused on a culturally appropriate, but what they really wanted to do was encourage some of the traditional foods within the tribe. Interestingly, that particular plan, which you can probably Google that as well, with the Rosebud, Redco was the name. It was the Rosebud Economic Development Corporation that led that, and we used that actually in Coamo, Puerto Rico as well after Hurricane Maria. They were interested in food sovereignty in the sense of resiliency after the hurricane, both for the immediate needs of the community in terms of food access related to the event, but also for rebuilding the food system in a more resilient fashion than maybe it was prior to the hurricane. And one other tribe I'll mention was the Delaware Nation in Anadarko, Oklahoma. They were interested in a multi-use facility or site within the community that both worked for them as well as 7 other tribes within the community, and the community, the non-tribal community as well. So it was a fairly complex interaction of partnerships that made the facilitation and the community engagement really important and beneficial to them. Maybe, Chip, I'll just double check any other questions on criteria before I kind of move on.
You know, I mean, maybe this will come up as you kind of go through the process here, but there have been a number of questions about funding. I know we talked about the difference between the technical assistance and a grant, but we may want to talk about like how the process sort of maybe leads to funding for some of these projects, or how communities are able to get funding for some of the things that they're able to do.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, this technical assistance does not transfer Funding, we don't have necessarily a precise value on the in-kind assistance. It varies by community because it depends on, just when you think about travel costs associated with different federal partners and state partners traveling, there's a cost associated with that. So that varies from community to community depending on how many partners travel, how far they travel. But one of the things we have seen frequently with LFLP communities is, and I will kind of get to this a little bit, well, I might as well now talk about it. When you have the final deliverable from us as a community, the community action plan, it's both an internal community document in a way that helps to prioritize and maybe operationalize activities that support the goals that the community is interested in. So it's kind of a living document in that way, but many communities also have used it as kind of a business plan that they then turn around and peddle towards grants that they may apply for, and they might even include it as an attachment because it shows that there's a lot of thought and effort going into it. And some of the funding agencies, both federal, state, as well as some private foundations, have tended to look favorably on it. We haven't measured precisely how many communities have benefited from it, but we occasionally get emails from former communities that say, we use that action plan as part of our application for a grant, and we're certain that it helped us to increase their likelihood of getting that grant. And we do encourage that as using it as a way to show, because a lot of grant funders, they're interested in providing funding, including foundations, but they want to make sure that the money is being well utilized when it's being offered. I did want to mention a couple things about community responsibilities, being mindful of the time here. Participation in this, what we really hope to see from every applicant is that they will participate. The steering committee members and the point of contact will participate in the planning calls ahead of the workshop and actively engage in planning for the workshop, and that they all participate in each of the calls, and that they will be in the 2-day workshop, including usually an evening session. Even in the virtual realm, we're doing evening sessions to try, especially for the public meeting portion, to try and make sure that people who are working during the day have an opportunity to participate. And then in the 3 facilitated post-workshop calls as well. So these are really important. Without an active steering committee, nothing's going to happen, and diminishes the results of the technical assistance. The community, when it is in-person workshops, is responsible for securing a venue, ideally located in or near areas of concern or neighborhoods that you're focusing on project work on, and ideally to highlight a facility potentially that could be used. I mentioned Cuamo, Puerto Rico, for example. They used a facility that was actually a historical old building. Actually had no roof on it at the time, and they put a tent up to try to reinvigorate and show to the community what the possibilities of that site could look like. So there's a lot of different ways that you could utilize facilities to have that workshop meeting. And then a community tour. That's really important, both in terms of highlighting to the federal partners and state partners who are visiting from out of town, but it's also a way to engage people who are maybe important to the food system or local food development, or small business entrepreneurs who are trying to get businesses off in a corridor that's struggling, to highlight and showcase them, give them a chance to talk to partners, and to really help grease the conversation that takes place in the workshop. And in the case of virtual workshops, we're still trying to do that, though it's often more of a PowerPoint slide presentation. We just had Pelican Rapids, Minnesota produce this really beautiful video as part of their tour that they presented to their workshop participants. So there's ways to still do the tour and highlight the assets within the community. And then inviting community members to the workshop. Outreach is critical to a successful workshop. Traditionally, we found through surveys that we do of the workshop participants that word of mouth is a really important way to get people to come to the workshops. And it's the steering committee's responsibility to do that. Each application has a point of contact, and that point of contact is basically the chair of the steering committee in our eyes, and they need to be available for the duration of the project to see through the whole LFOP process from call 1 of the steering committee to the last call after the workshop. So we expect them to be in place. In a couple of cases, we had responsibility transfer in the first few rounds of the program, and we found that really depleted the momentum of the effort. So we discourage that, and we would ask that you seek EPA and USDA partner approval before doing that. So the person you pick to do this is really important. Sometimes it's the mayor of the community that's listed as the point of contact. Within a smaller community, that has worked in some cases, but as a general rule, the mayor is probably too busy to be able to dedicate time, or they get pulled away in conversations, even during the workshop, that them being the point of contact may not be the ideal person. Somebody working on behalf of the mayor may be more ideal as a lead who can dedicate the time. And the point of contact must be from the organization that applies. And then I mentioned the steering committee. Ideally, we see a steering committee that's 4 to 6 people. Sometimes it's been a little bit larger. I think we've had up to 10 or maybe more in one case, where they could sort of demonstrate that having that inclusiveness on the steering committee was ideal to the outcomes of the workshop. But generally, you want a small enough group, but a well-diversified group that can help plan and get things done. So a large committee makes that harder sometimes. And that also depends on the willingness of the point of contact to kind of herd cats, if you will, to make sure that when you have a larger group that all voices are being heard, that everybody's being engaged, and that you can still move forward. We'd like to see that key stakeholders reflecting the community demographics and reflecting the places of concern are represented within the steering committee, and that each steering committee member will participate. In some cases in the application, you can have letters of support, and we generally would like to see, well, you can have letters of support broadly, which is great. Ideally, some of those letters of support would generate steering committee membership, and the people who are supporting it would become active that way. And in some cases, we may do a semi-finalist interview where we seek additional clarification, or there's some questions or doubts about the application that we feel like weren't answered. We don't do that for every semi-finalist, but in some cases we may do that. And then kind of moving towards the finish line here on the webinar, the timeline. Right now, applications are due October 30th. That's a firm deadline. In 1 or 2 cases in the past, we have extended by a week, but you know, I can't make a promise that that's going to happen. So I would try to stick to the October 30th deadline. And then through the November-January timeframe, there'll be an interagency review team that looks at all the applications, and if your application is incomplete, we will try to reach you and let you know that it's incomplete. If you do not respond and you do not complete it, it will not be considered. So completeness is important. And if there may be some other, if there's some errors or things like that, we'll also try to reach out to you to make sure that those are fixed in it, so that the application that goes to the review team is complete and looks good. I would not try to, you know, it's a 2-page application. I don't think I'll try to share it online because I might cut it off, but you can see it on the application page. It's a simple PDF form that you fill out, and then you have to download that form to your computer. And the instructions in the application website tell you to how to list the name on it, and then you send it back as an attachment along with a separate attachment of letters of support if you have any. And I encourage you to try to get letters of support. They help your application. You send that back to us to the email listed, the LFOP email address, and then we'll download that. In some cases, because it's 2 pages, a couple of applicants in the past have tried to cram a huge amount of text in there by lowering the font to a size 8 or 9. So I would encourage you not to do that. That doesn't work favorably. So maybe it's forcing you to be a little bit more concise, but we need to be able to read it. So that would be a great help. And then communities will be notified probably in the February timeframe. Sometimes it's as late as March. This last year it was a little bit later because of pandemic, but we would shoot for probably mid-February to announce, and then workshops would occur basically May through September of next year. And then I leave, this is the last slide, to remind you where you can find the application and the how to apply information on the EPA website. QR code if you want to do that by phone. And again, reinforcing that the deadline is October 30th, and there you can see the lfop@epa.gov is the email address to which you would send applications. So that is an overview of the application process. Maybe before we close, Chip, I'll check and see if there's any additional questions that.
Yeah, there's some really good ones that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm getting an echo. There's some really good questions. I've gotten a couple here that I think would be a good opportunity to talk about the LFLP toolkit that's online. So there's one that says, would your program support/fund our own expert facilitator teams who know our communities and culture instead of the federal technical assistance team?
Yes, well, so we don't fund that, but it's a good point, and I'm glad you raised it. That we have a online toolkit that basically provides a lot of the exercises and elements of the workshop that you can use to do your own facilitation as a community. It's just not an outside facilitator coming in, and you don't have necessarily the federal partners participating, but you can still use this process. And I tell you, it's been a fairly effective process from what I've seen. We've had some communities who are workshop recipients or were workshop recipients, such as in South Phoenix, Arizona. They took a lot of elements of the workshop, used the toolkit to develop their own additional outreach in other parts of the city along the same lines as they were developing a citywide community food action plan. But they started within a particular corridor in South Phoenix and learned from that process. But yes, you can do that. And in some cases, some of our regional offices have tried to work and provide additional information to applicants who did not get selected as finalists. You know, ideally, we would love to be able to serve every community that applies, but we have limited budget, and it varies from year to year. And so that determines basically how many communities we're able to provide direct technical assistance to. We are looking for opportunities and ways to maybe do more outreach to communities that do not receive the workshop assistance, and maybe in the virtual realm there may be some additional opportunities. So we look for that in the coming year, but the toolkit is a good place to start. Any other questions, Chip? Great. Well, with that, again, if you have questions that didn't get answered online right now, we'll try to produce a transcript of questions and try to answer them, or group them if they're similar questions and answer. There's also a frequently asked questions page on the website, so some of your questions may be answered through that, so I would encourage you to look at that as well. And then if all else fails, if you haven't heard anything that sounds similar to what you're asking, you can also reach out to us during the application process on the LFOP email address, and we will try to be as responsive as possible and get back to you especially while the open application period is open. So with that, I thank you. I appreciate your time. I really also want to commend anybody who's working within their communities, whether they're LFOP or not. If you're doing this type of work, just thank you for doing it, because it makes a huge difference within communities. You probably already know that. Sometimes it's nice to recognize that other communities are doing the same thing, and you're not doing it by yourself within your community. So congratulations to you on your efforts to date, and I look forward to seeing your application. Thank you.